It's Thank God on the Big Fat American Radio Network. What a great name for a network. And I just want to update everybody that's listening. Father Z or Father Rich, I don't care what you call me. I'll never be late for dinner, that's for sure. Along with Tony LaGuardia, talks about his life with Christine, his beloved. This is exciting because along the way, I think we all learn different technologies, and it's something that we shouldn't fear. You know, we should try to. The only way you're going to learn is by doing, like everything else. Right. And thus, because of all the different things that we're doing as a team here at BFA, we're now on Spotify, so you can download the podcast that we offer on Spotify. We're on TuneIn. We're getting ready for radio.com, iHeartRadio. Wow. Also available on a few other platforms, and coming soon, iTunes.
Wow.
So you can subscribe to all the different podcasts. And the more people that listen, the better for everybody.
Many people ask me where they can find our podcast, and I always tell them the Big Fat American Radio, and I don't know if they're too familiar with it, but now that it's all spread out all these other
everywhere.
Social media, that's awesome.
And not only that, but every time we do an episode, it automatically feeds to Facebook, Twitter, and there's a YouTube feed.
I didn't know.
At Zach Martin Rocks. So if you go to Zach Martin Rocks, you'll find Thank
Great.
God there. It's, you can listen to it. The video is just a picture, but that's how you do it these days. And then we'll tweet it out, and then we have other people that are on the staff that'll retweet. So what I would say, try to follow us on Twitter if you're a listener to Thank God, Zach Martin Rocks, because that's where you'll follow us on Twitter. And anytime we put out another episode, we can use everybody's help by spreading the word. Have you heard this podcast? You're also going to hear commercials in the podcast, which hopefully will eventually earn us revenue to pay for everything that we put together. Because, I'm seeding it with my own money,
right.
and I don't mind. I'm not saying that, but, I'm not saying that to make anybody feel bad. But I'm putting my own money into it with the expectation that it'll at least break even. That's what we're hoping.
Right.
I mean, even if it was $10 for what I pay for the subscription, that would be halfway there. That'd be kind of cool. And that would mean that we're having a lot of people listening and engaging into the podcast. Thus, the goal is being met. So it's not about making money. It's just that how the system is set. And to keep the expenses down, I had to enroll in what they call monetize.
Okay.
So after so many listeners, you get a split. It's sort of like when you hear a song on the radio, and you're wondering how the royalties go.
I often wonder about that.
Maybe a penny. So it's a penny for a play. It's not that much money, but every little bit helps. I mean, And we've got some big plans that we're putting together for a Big Fat American, as well as an assisted living environment for people on the spectrum. So all of these things are coming together. And I would say that for all of us, I think you just got to keep the faith. You really have to trust God and be faithful servant and let go of all of those things that bother you. Tony's going to give us a reading in a little bit. I don't know what it's about. He's going to give us information about the book and how he found it, and then he's going to give the reading, and then we're going to discuss it. So without further ado, Tony LaGuardia, the spotlight is on you.
Okay, thank you. What I'm going to do is we left off our last podcast with a reading, and it's from a book, and the name of the book is Jesus Calling, and it's Devotions for Every Day of the Year. And this book was given to my wife by a very, very dear friend. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off our podcast with a reading. So we ended the last podcast with a reading, but I'm going to start this one with a reading because it's very powerful. And I'd like Father Rich's response to this. And he doesn't know the reading I'm going to be reading at the moment. And then after he responds, I have a little background on this particular reading. So here we go. It says, I am yours for all eternity. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the one who is and was and is to come. The world you inhabit is a place of constant changes, more than your mind can absorb without going into shock. Even the body you inhabit is changing relentlessly. In spite of modern science's attempts to prolong youth and life indefinitely, I, however, am the same yesterday and today and forever. Because I never change, your relationship with me provides a rock-solid foundation for your life. I will never leave your side. When you move on from this life to the next, my presence beside you will shine brighter with each step. You have nothing to fear because I am with you for all time and throughout eternity.
Well, that's taken partly by the book of Revelation. I'm the Alpha and the Omega.
Mm-hmm.
It's a theological position that God is immutable. He doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I guess, a misconception of God and our relationship with God in the society around us. Now, it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. God exists. It doesn't matter whether you kill yourself or not. You're immortal. Your soul never dies.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, the things that we focus on each and every day are treasures here on earth. And we're not really spending too much time thinking about the treasures that we build in heaven and the rewards of heaven and living a good life to the best of our ability, following God's law, you know, which is really simple: to love God with your whole heart, mind, and body and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And also, you have to pray for your enemies. You can't go around hating people. And we rely on the mercy of God, and how we are merciful is how God's going to be merciful with us. So there's that part of it. And as much as we want to rationalize our situation and eventually say, well, before I die, I'm going to repent. Before I die, I'm going to come to Jesus. You know, you don't know how much time that you do have, as witnessed by you in your life with Christine.
Yes.
When you first got married, you would have never imagined appendiceal cancer, any cancer for that matter. But then you both probably had this feeling like, I don't know, just something. There's something underneath the surface I'm not really sure about. And then you experience pain, suffer, and loss. And I think it kind of reminds you about God and about creation and about how every life is a miracle and every death is also a different type of miracle. And it also makes you stop to slow down and take it all in. I tell people, and this is how it goes for me: live every day as if it's your last. And I don't mean that you get to do whatever you want to do.
Right.
You know, you got to stop the mindset, first of all, that people do this. Nobody lives forever, and they have something that's really bad for them, or they have another cigarette. That's the temple that the Holy Spirit dwells in, and you got to take the best possible care. I realize that people have addictions. I realize that people have problems with food or whatever it might be. It's because of a lack of faith.
Right.
This is where the trouble starts. This is where sin comes from. It's a lack of faith. So, something to contemplate. It's a really good reading. And, back to where you started, God is never changing. We're the ones that change. And God is the rock that we build our hopes and dreams on. Anything else is just made of sand. So tell me a little bit more, like how you got the book. And
well, yes, I wanted to give the significance of this particular reading and how I got to it, and why I'm bringing it into our podcast.
Before you get to there, Tony, did I give you the answer that you expected?
Yes, you did. Absolutely. And the reason for this reading is because, as I said on the last podcast, I started going through some of Christine's items, her clothing. I actually, whoever listened to the last podcast, I charged her cell phone, looked at some old pictures on her cell phone, and just some really, really wonderful memories of things. So as I was going through some other things in the house, I came across this book. When now Christine would read this book, Jesus Calling, she would read the devotional every day, because in the devotional, it's dated. Every devotional is dated with that particular day's date. So I see the book, about a week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, and I pick it up. It was off of her bedstand table right next to our bed. And I pick it up, and there's a permanent type bookmark in the book. So I pick it up, and I open to where the bookmark was. And it just so happens that reading is dated August 14th. And that was the last day of Christine's life. And what I just read hits every point of not only Christine's life, but where she's headed into heaven and what she's going to be ready for in heaven and not have to worry about any problems, no pain, no suffering, and how she's comforted by this reading on the last day of her life. Now, there's another significant thing that I don't understand, but, maybe I'm not supposed to understand it. Let's put it that way. There's no way that Christine could have physically opened this book and put this bookmark and read this on the day of her death, because for a few days to a week before that, she was not physically strong enough to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came across this book, and I'll show it to you, Father Rich, August 14th, right there.
Oh, my gosh.
And the bookmark is right here.
There.
So when I opened it, it's pretty significant that this was meant for her to read or be read to.
Let me see the book for a second.
Go right ahead.
All right, because the readings that Anthony is referring to is Revelations 1:8, Hebrews 13:8, Psalm 102, 25 to 27, and Psalm 48, 14. And the passages are used to create the devotion. And then, like he said, the bookmark is on August 14th. And I would say that bookmark was placed by Christine's guardian angel. Mm-hmm. I had the same experience when I was trying to, for whatever the reason, I end up, my mom was murdered. I don't know if we ever talked about this on this show.
We brushed over it.
And I remember growing up, and she would tell me about being a little girl, Russian Orthodox, Greek Catholic. I'm like, Mom, I guess I really never paid attention. It turns out that that's the legal name of the Russian church here in the United States early on. It was the Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church. Anyway, and she would talk about being a little girl and how she received communion. They do it via spoon. Everybody receives communion from the same spoon, body and blood of Christ. Now, if you were on the outside looking in, you'd be like, ew, gross, right? But then when you realize it's truly the body and blood of Christ, everybody draws near in faith and reverence, and they really believe that this is the body and blood of Christ, which it is.
Right.
And you cannot get sick from the body and blood of Christ. There's just no way. I have never been ill as a result of communing from the same chalice. Never gotten sick. My blood work is usually fantastic, right?
Great.
I think that when you... And I wanted to talk about this. I've been contemplating about this for a while. The attendance at church it seems to be low. And it's been going down the tubes for a long time. And when people read Scripture, especially the Passion, the crucifixion of Christ, they like to think that they're going to be the character in the Bible that's never going to desert Christ, that they'll be there at the foot of the cross, not like all the ones that scattered. The women, by the way, stood by Jesus, right? They were the bravest of the bunch. But most men, I would say, and I don't know how many women listening would what their take would be on it. I'm just the man perspective. When we read about these characters, we'd say, oh, we wouldn't be like Peter. We wouldn't be like Judas Iscariot. We wouldn't be like doubting Thomas or any of those things. We'd be at the foot of the cross. But you know something? If you're not going to church on Sundays, you're doing exactly what you're scattered. You're not there,
right.
Especially, when the sacrament of communion is being offered,
right.
Where you have the body and blood of Christ. You deserted Christ. You left him by himself. The faithful has shown up. Mm-hmm. You're not there. We got to start rethinking about our relationship with Christ and the church. Is the church perfect? No, it's not. Does it have problems? Yes, just like each and every one of us. Do you desert Christ? No, you shouldn't. Christ has never changed. We're the ones that changed. The attendance at church has changed. We've become cynical. We've become, kind of lukewarm. And like as in Revelation, later on, you were lukewarm and I spit you out. And it's this indifference that's causing much of our problems today. This unwillingness to be there present for the suffering. When you're not present for people that suffer, when you allow hunger to exist, when you mistreat the poor, when you do things that are harmful to children, when you abuse the elderly, you're abusing Christ.
Right.
For whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, that you do unto me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're getting a little too lackadaisical, and maybe because of this podcast, maybe because of Christine and your life with her and your faithfulness as a spouse and the readings that you're talking about and the sharing of the suffering. Christ suffered for all of us in the open. Christine suffered in the open, but she had this way about her. When we hear the story, she didn't have much bad to say about anybody, and she would make the most out of every situation. And back to where we started, live every day like it's your last. So
Right.
what are you going to do to make the most of this day?
Right, and in this passage here, in this devotional, I mean, this had to be read to her or shown to her on the last day of her life, and for me as her husband, for her to hear this on that last day, had to give her comfort going to where she was headed.
I agree.
You know,
I wanted to, I didn't finish the thought because it was like the bookmark put there by the angel.
right?
So I'm at the church, right? And now I'm interested. Do you have my mom's baptismal certificate, or where it's written in the ledger? Every church has this safe, and your names are written in the ledger. And by the way, for many years, that's how people were able to finish their family tree. They would go to the church for the record. So I talked to Father Steve over at St. Peter's and Paul's in Passaic. I found out that it was my mom's church that she grew up in around October when I talked to my uncle. I've already been a priest a long time now.
Right.
Finally finding this out. He's in his 80s. I'm like, you finally tell me now that it was your church? So, with all of these books, there's many books. So trying to find anybody's name anywhere
It's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough. So we got one of the books out, tried to figure out the years, and it was as if an angel was standing over my shoulder. I mean, I still remembered. I felt like there was an angel over my shoulder, and I opened the book, and right there is her name, 1942, Eleanor Sova. And I just started to cry. And then I found my Aunt Helen before that. And then I couldn't find my Aunt Reggie. The reason why is I didn't know how old she was. She's in her 70s. I thought she was like only, a little bit older than me. She's like, oh, thank you. I go, well, you went to Woodstock. I just thought you were just a little bit older than me.
Okay. But you would have.
Yeah, so I found
that presence.
Yeah, I felt that presence. Angels are real. How do we know that? Because when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he's crucified, he's praying, and God the Father sends angels to comfort him. And Jesus, at many times, he says, if I wanted, I could call legions of angels. No, God gave himself up for the world to save all of us. To save all of us. Doesn't matter, whether you believe it or not. Right. It doesn't matter what your religion is. He came to save all. And I believe every person on this planet at one point will get that individual encounter with Christ. And so with God, all things are possible. With man, nothing is really possible when we rely on our mortal self. So, that bookmark, August 14th, I'm not surprised. Just like I'm not surprised that, and I had no idea what I was going to find, but I knew that I would find something. And I felt the presence of that angel over my left shoulder, it seemed. Or it could have been the right. I don't know, but there was something behind me.
Right.
There's a photo of me, but on the wall was the picture of the man who baptized my mom.
Wow.
So here I am as a priest looking down, and the guy behind me is the man who, it's a picture, is his icon, really.
Right.
The man, and he didn't have a beard. Like, you notice a lot of Orthodox priests, they all have beards and mustaches, like long beards. I don't. I'm more of a Western-style Orthodox priest, and because of my secular work, and because my daughter, as a little girl, a beard scared her. So I shaved it off, and she won't let me grow a beard. I don't know why, but, these are the things that, hey, it's not, the size of your beard is not what saves you.
Right.
Okay. So I found that whole thing interesting. And we always say this, there's no such thing as a coincidence.
Absolutely.
No,
this was not shocking to me. It was just another situation where I felt Christine's presence and the presence of God in our lives.
And do you think that who put the bookmark there? You think it was an angel?
Had to be.
It had to be, right?
Had to be. I mean, there was no way that it could have been Christine, because she was not
I
strong
remember.
enough.
I mean,
you
I
had
was
seen
there.
her,
Yeah.
just
maybe a few days before she passed.
Right.
Right.
So what I do now is I go, and I've been reading the devotion every day myself now.
That's good.
With the dates, now. And it's a good way to start the day.
I agree.
It's a really good way, a positive way to start the day. It relieves any of the human stress you may have or the human thoughts, because for myself, I'm included in this. Life has lots of, I guess you would call it stress and thoughts of what ifs and, a lot of things coming up of how you're going to handle them. And Chris had a great way of teaching, not only living her life this way, but teaching others around her, including myself, that listen, just go with it. Go with the day, believe in God, and if you really trust in Him, He will show you the way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's easily said, but not easily done.
And the only way that you're going to be in a better place is by investing your time in prayer and making it a rule. I call it a prayer rule.
Yes.
So this is my prescription for anybody listening. I start small, because when you start too big, you get yourself in trouble, you wear yourself out. Prayer is really, it takes concentration. It really does. It takes effort, right? You got to want to do it. So every day I pretty much have the morning prayers, and then I add some Psalms to that and what's called hours. I'm also a priest, so we kind of have to do different things. Some in the Catholic Church call it the office, right? Liturgy of the hours. So, and it used to be, there was a time where it was a sin for the priest not to do the liturgy of the hours. They've kind of relaxed that. But I say, anytime you separate yourself from God, that is a sin in itself. So you don't want to do that, You want to talk to God on a regular basis. Prayer does work, but it doesn't work like this. Hey, God, how come you never help me out, man?
Right.
If you're not talking to God all the time, then, it's going to be, you have to have some patience and do not fret. So I've seen this many times. And by the way, everything is relative. When someone has cancer and they're suffering, the idea of the light staying on or off really don't become that much of a deal, right? Whether you're going to pay the electric company.
Right.
The idea of making your auto payment on time is no longer a big deal when somebody's suffering, or where you live is inconsequential.
Priorities of life really change.
The clothes that Christine owned, really, they don't matter.
Right.
And so that you found uses for them. So, detachment and not being materialistic are really keys to happiness. And don't compare yourselves to other people. We see these stories in the Bible where people started to compare. Hey, I have a question for you, Master. What is it? Can I sit at your left and sit at your right? Well, those aren't for me to give. Are you willing to drink of the same cup? Yeah, I am. Well, you will. Let me tell you, that's the price of following me. And so back to the prayer. It strengthens you. And I want to just think about the suffering Messiah and Jesus through his earthly ministry. How many times you read he went off to pray, went off to be by himself. Find some time. If you have to have a little prayer closet, that's great. You don't need the newfangled, what everybody else is doing, new trends.
Exactly.
Like you said in that reading, God is unchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Man changes all the time.
All the time.
So, here's what you think. Man, I just need the right aromatherapy. Or, man, I just got to go to the right Pilates class. Or, man, I need to... The amount of time we spend on these physical aspects is, for the most part, it's a waste. I'm not telling you it's not important. I'm just saying your priority's got to be prayer number one, and then everything else falls. And in the Psalms, you'll see time and time again, do not fret. I mean, God helps the righteous.
I think part of that is, and we've touched upon this, where you're in prayer, you want something to occur in your life, and it's on your time, man's physical time frame. It doesn't work like that.
No.
It doesn't work like that. We've touched upon that.
I think if you want to do God's will, that's really a scary thing. People, they don't want to hand it over to God.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the idea of using the word submission,
mm-hmm. Okay.
Because that has connotations in today's language that gives you a different religious system.
Right.
So I'm not gonna put it that way, but I would say desire to follow is better. to do God's will. That's what I would say. And in a way, it is surrendering yourself, yes, to Christ, but think of it as following God's will. What is good for God? What is good for you? That's the ultimate. A lot of people are afraid to make that step because they think that if you follow God's will for you, that means you're going to go to Africa as a missionary. Right. That means you're going to have to become a priest or a sister or a nun, or whatever you want to call it, or a deacon or a subdeacon or be a lector. No, none of that. If you're supposed to be a priest, you'd be a priest by now, or you're on your way to becoming a priest. Or it's in the back of your mind, and someday you will become a priest. Let me tell you, it's like trying to be Jonah getting away. The whale's going to get you and spit you out in the shore. If you want to live a godly life and do God's will, if God's calling you to that, you know it. There's just no doubt about it. You know it. It bothers you for your whole life. And some people just continually say no, and they'll have to live with that decision, right? But I'm going to tell you that he doesn't call all of us to that. What he does call all of us to do is love God with our whole mind, body, and spirit, and also to love our neighbors as ourselves. 2 greatest commandments, he says that. Now, prayer, you'll see Jesus praying. Before he suffers on the cross, he's praying for strength. He's saying, God, if you could take this cup away, take it away, but not my will, but your will be done. And if you can get to that level, then you're in a much better place. And that is going to be the difference between who you are and what you do. If you can understand who you are, you're going to have a lot happier life. Yes. Don't concern yourself with what's going on Facebook with these lovely pictures and everybody having a good time. That's their life. And by the way, everybody's reality is a little bit distorted, right? You're gonna mention
it's a lot. Everyone's is distorted. And what you're talking about, all of these things you're touching upon about how to, in a real godly life, live a way where you trust in God, where you didn't want to use the word submission, which I understand and I agree that you don't. That's kind of in today's world has a lot of different.
Well, because we've changed as a society, right. God hasn't changed, so I'm deliberately using different verbiage,
right,
to get the point across because
exactly.
I don't want to make. I am not a fan of a certain system,
right?
Okay, it's not godly to me. I'm not going to be on any sort of. I'm not going to. At this point, I was thinking about this. There's going to come a point where I'm going to have to actually be more vocal about it. Mm-hmm. But at this particular time, I feel like the Spirit is saying, don't. Just hold on a second.
Thing is, and all of our listeners know, and you, Father Rich, know that the way every day that I lived with Christine through illness and her health since the day we met, I've mentioned this numerous times, Christine was and is really the only person I've ever seen live a true godly life like that, like you're talking about. Like literally giving up everything to God, not letting the worries of human life and our existence get to her for anything. And it showed me, and I know it has shown others around her, how that if you do that, you'll be rewarded. You'll be rewarded and you'll live a different life, a really a stress-free life where these human supposed problems and things that come into play, if you truly believe like she did and does, you'll live a lot better, better life.
And the other thing is, these days, the depression, it seems like a lot of people suffer from depression. Mm-hmm. And I was visiting a patient this past weekend, and I said, well, I think if people went and saw their pastor on a regular basis and confessed their sins on a regular basis, it would save them the copay.
Yeah, you had mentioned
it would make them healthier. And the lady responded, well, we actually give solutions. I'm like, yeah, what is your solution? It's just that, like, the solution is all up here in your mind. It's in your skull. So, it's basically the same thing. And so if you're coming to me with, let's just say you have a drug addiction problem, I'm going to say to you, well, I'm going to say that you got some demons you got to get rid of.
There you go.
Okay, let's work with that. Let's work this out in confession and prayer and do this on a consistent basis and give it all to God. And I'm telling you, you will beat this.
Yes.
But it's not you yourself that's beating it. It's God helping you beat it. Then I got one situation, and sometimes physically we're not cured. Sometimes physically we're not healed. but more importantly, we're spiritually healed.
Okay.
Okay? We're made whole spiritually. Take Bartimaeus for a second. Here's a blind beggar outside of Jericho. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And Bartimaeus is yelling out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And he's making a ruckus. He's causing a scene. And everybody around him is like, listen, calm down. Like, this is Jesus we're talking about. Shh, quiet. He doesn't listen to them, which is a way of like, don't listen to what people tell you to do.
Exactly.
They don't define who you are.
That's right.
Yells out even louder to only have Jesus stop in his tracks. And then Jesus says, go tell him to come here. The master wants to see you. Bartimaeus, he's got a mat. That's the only thing he owns to his name. That mat no longer becomes a concern, right?
Right.
Because he's dying to his old self. He's not going to be the same. He's starting a new life, right? Tosses everything aside, runs to Jesus. Jesus letting them ask because, Jesus is loving enough to let somebody have their dignity. What can I do for you? Because you can imagine how it would be like, I already know what you're here for. That's really off-putting, right? I know what you're here for.
Right.
You're going to ask for money, aren't you? And that, is such a nasty thing to say to somebody. Okay, what do you want, Bartimaeus? I wish I could see. If you will it, I could see. All right, your faith has made you see. He's jumping up and down. Not only did he know who Jesus was and what Jesus was capable of offering, but he was more excited not exactly by gaining his sight, but by being reborn in his spirit. So Bartimaeus has a bigger gift than his sight. He sees Christ for who he is, and he's excited. He just can't stop talking about the guy. He wants to follow him everywhere. So, that's an interesting perspective. Then, you might be listening and say, well, listen, I'm no good. It's never too late. Even 5 minutes before death, you still got, there's still some time that Jesus did. With him, it's an eternity, right? But let's just think about what we call the real world is not the real world. Right. And what we call the kingdom of God is the actual real world. Let's just talk about the average person, what happens. Somewhere along the way, if you're brought up in the faith, you go out on your own, right? You go out into the world, the real world, and you decide what you want to be when you grow up, and you go to college, and you're out partying with the guys, you're drinking beer, you see the person you're attracted to, and you try to hook up, and then maybe that doesn't work out, so you hook up with somebody else, and you got your car, you're driving around, and you're having a good time, you're going down to the Jersey Shore in the summertime, all of those things that people like to do. Not giving it much thought. God, you know what? You make time to watch TV, right? The One-Eyed Monster, the Boob Tube. Yeah, everybody was making sure that they watched Game of Thrones. They got finale, which I didn't see and I don't really care about. People made time for that. People make time for the football game on Sunday. Right. Hey, listen, I like football too. People make time to go play Little League. They make time for this and that. And when it comes to going to church, they desert them like they would at the cross, even though they think that they don't. Right. Think about that. Yes. I'm not innocent of any of that myself, but eventually you come to your senses, like the prodigal. So what does the prodigal do? There's two guys here. And the custom was, after the death, the estate would be split. Not exactly even. The older got a little bit more and the younger got a little bit less, but the younger kid, he wants his inheritance now. So he talks to his dad, which is really kind of rude. Dad, listen, I'm not going to wait for you to die. Give me my inheritance right now, which is kind of a hassle for the dad. I was like, oh my gosh, how do I even, I don't even know what the future value is going to be. Okay, have it your way. Here's what it is now. He goes to the big city, pockets full of money, right? Having a great time, getting girls, having sex and partying it up and, the real world, right? That's not real, by the way. He doesn't have a real job, okay? So he spends his entire inheritance on this horrible way of life, which he thinks is good because all his friends told him so, And then a famine breaks out. And none of his so-called friends, when he's out of money, are his friends. So he gets a job at a pig farm. Now, for a Jewish boy, this is not a good job. You're working with pigs, really? You're not even allowed to have anything to do with a pig. And he's thinking, oh, man, if I could just eat the pods the pigs feast on, that would be great. And then all of a sudden he comes to his senses. He goes, you know what? My father treats his servants better than I have it here.
Right.
Comes to his senses. He goes, and he prepares a speech in his head. He goes, I'm going to go home. I'm going to tell my dad. And he really means this. He's not like saying, I just had to come back home. Is my room, I didn't do one of those.
Mm-hmm.
He's not, he's not like expecting anything except, I got to tell my dad I'm sorry I sinned against him in heaven. I'm no longer worthy to be called his son. Make me one of your servants. And he was willing to do that. Father's sitting out there, on the porch every day wondering what happened to his son. Son, he sees him in the distance, gets all excited, runs out to him, puts his arms around him, kisses him, tells the servants, wash him up, get him some new clothes and put a ring on his finger, and accepts him back.
Right.
The older son, everybody goes, I've been doing your will the whole time. You never threw me a party one time, man. What's up with that? We never really focus on that older son, right?
Right.
Well, the older son represents people who think they're doing God's will, right? He's concentrating on what's good for him. And if he really loved his brother like he was supposed to, there's no way his brother would have been going off with a pocket full of money going into there. His brother would have stopped him. His brother would have done something to knock,
Gotcha.
To put him in the right
Taking the
source.
extra step.
Yeah, taking the extra step. He didn't love his brother. He didn't even refer to him as his brother in the conversation. So, there's those kind of thoughts. And that's a representation of the kingdom of heaven and how God, wants us to come back to him when we get in the right mind, when we get in the right senses. It's also a warning to those who consider themselves religious about how their attitude has to change.
Exactly.
So just because you're showing up every Sunday doesn't mean that you're in the mind, just because you have the title of father this or father that or sister this, sister that, or the Reverend Doctor doesn't mean that you're in good standing with God.
Agreed.
It's like, there's a lot going on there. So we all have to come to our senses. Through Christine's suffering and you witnessing, she had no choice but to come to the senses, quickly. And maybe that's the gift in suffering, for us to come to our senses, to realize what life is truly about, and to really understand where our treasure should be. It shouldn't be on something that is going to decay, but it should be on something that's eternal. Now, love is eternal. And as a hospice chaplain, I'm dealing with like horrible losses all the time.
All the time, I'm sure.
So this woman, she goes to me, well, I deal in traumatic cases. I'm like, I'm a hospice chaplain. There's not much more traumatic than that.
That's for sure.
Everybody's death is traumatic.
Sure.
Anyway, so what I've noticed that at the end of somebody's life, they reflect, but they're not talking about the car that they drove, unless it's a really cool car like my Challenger RT. I'm probably on my deathbed. I'm like, whatever you do, don't give that car to my brother. He'll crash it. But I have a sense of humor that would do something like that. They just didn't want you to have a car, okay, because he knows better. He loves you as his older brother. He doesn't want you to get killed. But nobody ever talks about their wealth or the house they live in.
Sure.
And it seems to be like God's right. It's not the issue. It's like, where are you going now? Are you in a good place? And the stories I hear, I can't repeat them because I just think that that's not the purpose of this. But man, every once in a while, things happen as serving God that really opens up your eyes, and you really do appreciate everything that you do have. And just like your journey with Christine, it's still not over.
No way.
Can you explain for somebody who's listening that might be losing a loved one or has lost a loved one, how much more intense your love is and how you feel closer to Christine now that she's gone?
Sure, I can. We've talked a little bit about my feelings of how Christine is with me each and every day. I feel her with me each and every day by not only the things I see that remind me of her, but I also see and feel Christine around me in things in the world like that are kind of like a negative aspect of the world in regard to. I'll try to explain this a little bit better. You run across people every day, and there's a lot of materialistic tendencies to human beings where they put their emphasis and their importance on whether it's whatever it may be, money, houses, cars, wealth.
What they do.
What they do for a living. Well, when I hear those conversations, it brings me back to a place, and it's her bringing me back to that place that says, wow, I guess that's what makes them feel important in their life. But boy, the importance in your life is not that. And the importance in your life is your family, believing in God, having a trust in God, having a real loving relationship with your spouse, with your children. And so I'm covering a lot of areas, but, the gist of what I'm talking about is she's with me in so many different ways.
Yeah. I mean, she's with you in that book.
In this book.
August 14th.
But here's the thing, every morning when I read one now, that's her kind of guiding me to read them because, I'm not going to sugarcoat it after her passing until today, right? And probably forever, I'm going to miss her. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Miss her presence with me. But what I do get out of reading these devotions on a daily basis and the reminders from her on a daily basis is just how wonderful Christine looked at life and shows us how to live life, even though she's not physically here right now.
Before her death and before she got sick, did you think of any of this stuff?
In regard to, give me an
but just
example.
your approach about how you look at life and,
Yes, actually, yes, I did. Not as intently, though, as after she got sick. And I did kind of brush upon this, I think either the last podcast or one before that, where I said that since the day I met Chris, I knew there was something really special about her, about the way she looked at life in general. She never worried about the next day. We've gone through this many times, but I did see something in Chris where I should try to live more like her, where the everyday worries and concerns, to me, never worried or concerned her. So I did see it before she got sick. Mm-hmm. But then what happened is when she was diagnosed with cancer, and I saw then how she even lived through that, such a horrible disease and such a tough way to survive on a daily basis, it brought my belief in God and to see how life should be lived to a whole nother level because of her. Uh-huh. But I did see it before she got sick. Okay. But again, it did intensify drastically after that.
I think that, for me, I get that from my wife, but more so from my daughter. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you why. I have never seen another individual in my life that has no qualms about like, hey, Dad, will you take me to Germany?
Right.
And she'll go, I know you'll make it happen. And I'm like,
with no worry or concern,
no worry about
right?
the money or anything. She's like, she knows it's going to happen.
Yes.
Now she wants to go to Norway the next trip.
Wow.
So I'm like, and I don't know how, but I know how God makes it happen. He opens up the doors. Yes. I mean, sometimes I sweat. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay for this?
Right.
But, I think that's really what everybody frets about. How am I going to pay for it? It's already been bought and paid for. And by the way, the money of the world or the wealth of the world doesn't belong to anybody. Right. It's just like somebody's staking a claim. Right. And you know what? I'm not saying to be irresponsible. Absolutely. That's not what I'm saying. But just have a lighthearted attitude like Christine or like my daughter Sophie. If you could do that, man, that is, and God talks about that. Where your treasure is, your heart will be.
Well, the worry and the fear about that is unnecessary.
Yeah, but something? Somebody listening right now is like, easy for you to say.
Well, I saw it.
I saw it too.
And you see it also.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say I'm that way.
Well, look,
I try, but I'm not going to lie about it.
I think when I get worried, it's not over about how my situation is, but the people that depend on me.
Absolutely, they become, with me also.
Yeah, right. So
absolutely,
I think that's where. By the way, that's where your faith comes in. And I'm going to wrap this up. We got a lot of good stuff, and I'd like to do another one of the devotions next time.
Okay.
I think those are great. But I want to just take a little time to tell people that if you're going to read the scripture, vicariously put yourself in that story and say you would never desert Christ at the cross if you don't show up at church, if you can be there, it's exactly what you're doing. Now, for some people, They can't make it. Some people have definite problem. God knows about that. But I'm going to tell you that their spirit is there. You know, if you can't make it to church, you can spend some time on Sunday morning and focus on God. You could just focus on God every day. But please, for your own good, do not desert Christ at that cross. And if you are Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Episcopalian, or whatever the denomination, when you have communion, you have to believe that Christ, through a miracle, is really present. Or don't attend at all. Don't even consume it. But especially for me, I marvel at how Orthodox Christians and even Roman Catholics, because I know, you know, there's certain things I know. I marvel how people just take it for granted and don't like understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a bad job by the priest. I don't know, but you know, the body and blood of Christ made available to you. It's true. It's 100% true, and it sustains you. It makes you born again every time you eat the body and drink the blood. It's a mystery. We can't in the West take our mind and reason this stuff out. It's not about the mind. It's about what's in the heart. So I just want to wrap up by reminding you that the last thing you want to do is desert Christ on the cross. Be at the foot, bring all your problems, cry and pray and beg and repent, change your life, focus on your relationship with God. It's going to change who you are. It's not going to change who God is. That'll never happen, but it'll change who you are as an individual. And you know something? You're going to live a better and wholesome life. Don't forget, you could follow us at facebook.com/BigFatAmerican. I know it's a funny name for a radio network, but you remember it, don't you? Spotify, like Big Fat American, subscribe to it. When we're on iTunes, we'll let you know. Subscribe to the podcast. Share them with your friends. You'll find us all over social media. We're on YouTube at Zach Martin Rocks. Please share these episodes. It's going to change the world for somebody. We don't know who, but it's going to change somebody's world. And if you have any questions, you can always send me an email. I'll make it very easy. ZACH@ZachMartinRocks.com, and then I'll forward it to Tony if you have any questions.